Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar. We will cover Grails 3 for Spring developers, featuring Jeff Brown, co-founder of the Grails framework, and Josh Long, Spring developer advocate at Pivotal. Before we jump into the content, I would like to remind everyone that G3 Summit is taking place in a couple of weeks, starting on November 28th and ending on December 1st. Josh, if you could advance to the next slide, please. Here you will find an exclusive discount code where you can save $200 on the price of your ticket. We will send some information via email after the event. Next slide, please, Josh. Thank you. OCI is your host today. We are the home to the Grails framework. Our team includes the Grails co-founders as well as the subject matter experts who actively contribute to and maintain the framework on an ongoing basis. If you have questions about the topics covered during the presentation today, please use the chat box. I see many of you have already found the chat box. Send your questions to Object Computing, and we will be sure to address your questions as we go. At this time, I would like to introduce Jeff Brown, co-founder to the Grails framework. Let's get started.
Great. Thank you very much, Nikki. Good afternoon. Good morning for some of you. My name is Jeff Brown. As Nikki said, I'm the Grails practice lead here at OCI. OCI has been the home of the Grails team for coming up on 3 years now. We're headquartered here in St. Louis, Missouri, which is where I happen to live, but we are a distributed team all over the world. So we're the folks who created the Grails framework, and we're the folks who maintain it and support it. We've got a whole team of engineers that what they do is maintain the framework and do project work for clients and help clients with upgrades and developer support. So anything at all that we can do to help you out with work around Groovy, Grails, Gradle, and the whole G ecosystem, please reach out and let us know. We're really excited to be connected with all of you today. We're going to cover a whole lot of ground, and as the title and info that's been published already suggests, we're going to provide a look at the Grails framework from the perspective of a Spring developer. And there's no better person on the planet to play the role of a Spring developer than Mr. Josh Long. Josh, are you with us? No audio yet, Josh. Looks like you're unmuting yourself right now.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Good afternoon, sir.
Hi, good afternoon. Good evening, Ryan.
Where in this wild world are you today, sir?
Right now, I'm in Antwerp, Belgium for the just hot off the DevOps Belgium event. And,
that is
super
awesome.
Happy to join you.
I've been there myself, and it's a fantastic conference and a fantastic city. I'm sorry I couldn't make it this year.
And I know you have. I have memories of us being here.
Super good times.
Yeah.
Maybe tell the few people who might not know who you are already, tell them a little bit about yourself.
Oh, right. Well, so my name is Josh Long. Very nice to meet you all. I'm a Spring developer advocate on the Spring team at Pivotal. I'm an open source engineer and contributor. I have the dubious distinction of being the #1 most widely acclaimed, most highly prolific and visible and sort of exemplary contributor of bugs, but still #1 in all the projects to which I'm a contributor in bugs committed. Now, it's not a great record, but it's a record, right? I'm an open source contributor to a number of different open source projects, including Spring Boot, Spring Cloud, Spring Integration, Vaadin, Activity, Timely, Spring Batch, etc. And I'm also a book author and a training video lead. And so I've just finished my 5th book. It's called Cloud Native Java. And for those of you who are wondering, the book is all about how to build applications that survive and thrive in the cloud in terms of Spring Boot, Spring Cloud, and Cloud Foundry. and it's late. The book took a long time to get right and to deliver. And most people wonder what could have taken us so long. I mean, the technology is all there. All we have to do is write the story, and that's true. What took us the longer part of that 2 years was figuring out what animal to put on the cover. So anybody who knows anything about O'Reilly books knows that nobody cares what's in between the covers. It lives and dies based on the strength of the animal on the cover. Until we deliberated long and hard on this, we looked for the best animal for our book, and we settled upon the blue-eared kingfisher, which is the bird you see perched upon that title there. The blue-eared kingfisher is a bird that is indigenous, or as we'd say in English, native to the Indonesian Java Islands. It's a bird that is indigenous or native to Java. And birds, of course, well, they fly. They fly through the clouds. So it's a bird that is indigenous or native to Java that flies through the clouds. It's a cloud native Java bird. It's a bird that, never mind. Anyway, it'll come. Give it time. So all that to say, I work at Pivotal, and at Pivotal, like OCI, we have I think one thing that motivates us is helping people go faster and build better software more productively. Isn't that true?
Absolutely, that is true.
So I know that we on our side we talked to a lot of organizations about microservices, and I know that Grails, of course, is a great sort of vehicle for that as well. And a lot of people, when they move to this sort of world of trying to optimize for agility, they don't want just working software. That's no longer the only sort of litmus test, is it? You want working software that you can deliver quickly and that you can do safely, right? And so we're always looking for ways to go faster there. And so I'm really happy to have the chance to sort of give this presentation with you, my old friend. This is a natural, really, really natural thing for us to do.
Absolutely. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So you commented on time to market, being able to build stuff more quickly. And Spring has always been an important part of that for the Java community in general, right? Folks who want to build robust applications quickly and want to write those applications in Java generally would look to Spring to help solve some of those problems. And the Grails framework, as you know, so we're the framework is over 10 years old now, and
Wow.
part of our focus from the very beginning has always been developer productivity, being able to build stuff, robust web applications more quickly than you might otherwise be able to. So that time to market and developer productivity focus is something that the Grails team and the Spring team have always had in common, for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned Java and Spring, and you're absolutely right. Spring is definitely a Java framework, and it works okay with other languages. I would say it works pretty well, but it's there's more to be had than just working through or working with Spring through the prism of some other language, as we'll see today. So with that, let's actually let's start with something familiar, or at least perhaps familiar for those who have already worked with Spring Boot. Let's start with the Spring Boot application. Does that work for you?
That's a good plan. Why don't we just get right to the IDE and write some code and see what we can break?
Okay, so we'll start with a new application, as we always do here at start.spring.io. This is my second favorite place on the internet. Anybody who knows me knows that this is my second favorite place on the internet. My first favorite place, of course, is production. I love production. You should love production. You should go as early and often as possible. Bring the kids, bring the family. It's the happiest place on earth. It's better than Disneyland. But if you're not already in production, you can begin your journey here at start.spring.io. And we're going to build a new application, just something to work with, right? So I'm going to build a very trivial domain application here, a reservation service. But we're going to use Gradle, of course, because that's the right thing to do, TM. We're going to use Groovy, right? So we're going to go ahead and use some familiar tools and technologies here. And then we're going to build a web application. We're going to take advantage of Spring support for building web applications. We'll use JPA, the Java Persistence API, because I make terrible life decisions. So JPA. We'll use H2, which is an embedded in-memory SQL database. And because it's in-memory and embedded, it's going to lose all of its state on every single restart. And then we'll use Actuator, which supports observability. The idea that every production application will eventually fail, and it becomes very useful, very valuable to understand and surface information about that application in such a in such a circumstance, right? So the actuator serves that use case. So that's, I think, enough for now. It's a very trivial application. So we'll hit generate, and that gives us a zip file, which we'll have downloaded. So go here. I'm going to make that a little larger. Can you see that, my friend?
That looks good. That's a good size font, I think.
Okay.
So what just happened there in the browser is you selected some options for how you wanted your Spring project configured, and you clicked go, and a zip file was downloaded that you just now extracted. Is that correct?
Yeah, I took a little shortcut. I have a little program there called UAO. All it does is it unzips the zip file and then opens the build.gradle or Maven palm.xml. It uses IDEA, it's IntelliJ IDEA alias, so IDEA space artifact. And once that's done, IntelliJ prompts me to import the project from Gradle. So I'll say, okay, let's go. And we'll have a new application up and running here pretty quickly.
So you're using IntelliJ IDEA.
Yep. You don't really. Sorry?
I'm a big fan.
Yeah, lots of good options out there for what we're trying to do here today. I like to remind people that while the Spring Tool Suite is a good choice for Spring developers, and while the IntelliJ Ultimate Edition is a good choice for Spring developers, and while the Spring Boot tools for NetBeans is a good choice for Spring developers, you don't really need it if you're using Spring Boot. I mean, it's just public static void main and Gradle or Maven, which most IDEs will support, and whatever flavor of language you want to use these days. And most IDEs will have that. We don't need application server support. We don't need much beyond just public static void main. And so we have now a little class. We have our entry point into the application. It's a typical Spring Boot application. And what we want to do is want to be able to manage, we want to have an entity of some sort. So let's just build a domain around this this entity called a reservation. And I'm going to, it's a JPA entity, so we'll signal that it's a JPA entity like that. We're going to need to take care of we're going to need to take care of things like creating a toString method. So we'll use some Groovy transforms here for that. A hash code and equals and hash code. There's that dyslexia. We need a primary key, so we'll say long ID and at generated value. And we need a reservation name field. So this is a field that gets persisted in the database as a column called reservation _ name. So that looks okay, right? And I want to be able to manage instances of this entity. So I'll create a repository. This is a Spring Data repository. It's an umbrella project that manages the tedious data management lifecycle of an entity for us. Whoa, easy there. So we're going to say interface reservation repository extends JPA repository managing entities of type reservation whose primary key is of type long. And that's it. That's our basic repository. And now we can actually write some data to the database. And again, Spring at the end of the day, it's just a big bag of beans, right? It just needs to know about the arrangement of those objects. And so we can tell it a number of different ways. We can annotate our classes with so-called stereotype annotations, and that tells Spring to register the bean with the framework, with the context, and then manage it. Another way is to define so-called bean provider methods, or bean definition methods like this one. So I'm going to say def init, and I'm going to return a bean of type application runner. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say return, and here I've got I want this lambda, I want this block of code. Ultimately I want the JVM to see this block of code as an instance of type application runner. So I'm going to cast it. I'll say as application runner, and this will coerce that type.
Application runner is an interface, yes?
Yeah, application runner is an interface in Spring Boot. It's got a very simple job. It's got a void run method that takes one argument, which is actually a wrapper around the variadic arrays that are variadic arguments that are passed into the application. Here, it's the public static void main string argument array. And because of that, it's a functional interface, right? In Java 8 parlance, which means that I can adapt it to a lambda like this. I can choose to declare and acknowledge that parameter. I can say that the parameter is called args, and then I just do it's almost exactly the same as with Java in this case. I'm declaring an argument that's I don't need to define the type because it's implied by the type of functional interface. Or I can choose to omit the argument, right? So I'm gonna use that repository that we created earlier. I'll pass that in here, and then I'll save some data, right? So that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna save some data, and we're gonna use some names here. Let's see, Jane and Judy, George, Elroy.
Who are these people?
Sorry?
Who are these people?
Oh, I'll give a free copy of the Spring source code to anybody who can tell us.
Right.
So there we go. It's Apache 2 licensed, just for the reference. Okay. So okay, we've got these names, and what I want to do is I want to visit each one of these. What I've just done here is I've created a list, right? That's a list. It's a literal. It's a list. Literal. It's a syntax for building a list, and I've got a bunch of names, and I want to iterate over each one and visit them and do something with it in the closure here. So I've got a closure, and in that closure, I want to actually manipulate the instance. I could, as I say, give it an explicit argument name for the closure parameter there, but again, it suits me to use it, the implicit parameter it, since that's the string that I want to work with. So I'm going to say reservation repository dot save new reservation, and when I create the reservation name, I want to specify on object instruction that I wanted to override the reservation name reference. So there it is. That's the parameter, rather, the field. The result of that should be that I have as many, many new records in the database. And then just to confirm as much, I'm going to visit all the records that come back. I'll say find all dot each, and we'll print out the records like so.
That all looks great. Just so some folks are commenting in the chat that they're not familiar with Groovy, and so I don't want to go on a major detour here, but just really quickly, we can one more time take a quick pass here and describe what's going on. But it looks like at line 26, you've defined an array list that has a bunch of strings in it, and the .each method is a Groovy way to iterate over the list.
Yep.
So we're going to iterate over the list, and for every element in the list, we're going to create a new reservation whose reservation name is that element in the list, and that reservation is being passed to the save method, right?
Yep. So in just two very clean lines, we're saying take these names, create objects, save them in the database, and then finally down here we say call the database, get everything back, and then visit all the return values and print out their names.
Right.
Okay. Well, very good. So and yeah, this is also you notice that our method here we defined it with def. We didn't have to explicitly define the return type. Now we could, couldn't we, Jeff? We could actually say that this is an application runner if we wanted to, but it'll figure that out on its own.
Right.
If I omit it, and we're being very explicit about it here, right? Do I need to specify this if I explicitly define the return value?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Do I need to define that? Do I need to specify that if I specify the return value explicitly in the method definition?
I don't know if Groovy will do the coercion for you there implicitly or not. But what you've got written there now will definitely work and is the idiomatic way to do it.
Right. All right. So let's leave it at that. So that'll actually give us something. Right? That's a pretty good start. So let's run this code and see what we get. Okay. Run.
All right, so what should happen here is we're just populating the database. There's no web interface or controllers or anything. We've just interacted with the database, right?
Right, exactly. And so that wasn't so bad. I mean, it's very productive, very clean sort of approach. I really like this, right? I didn't have to do anything. I didn't have to leave Groovy to make this as succinct and clean as this is. In Java, this would be a lot of tedious sort of getters and setters, and your IDE could code generate it, but again, to what end?
Groovy's really good at getting rid of a lot of the boilerplate code that Java developers are used to writing or used to just pressing keyboard shortcuts in their IDE, that their IDE can generate that code for you. A lot of that code disappears with Groovy, and getters and setters are a good example of that, right? So that string reservation name you've got at line 44 there, that's really a private field called reservation name, and there's a public getter called get reservation name and a public setter called set reservation name. And in Java, you'd typically type private string reservation name, and then you'd press Command N or whatever the keyboard shortcut is to generate getters and setters. And the ID would fill all that stuff in for you. And in Groovy, you generally will just skip that step and let the compiler generate them for you.
Right. Okay, so I think we need a view. Let's start with a REST endpoint. We'll say reservation REST controller. All right, and we'll just make this a REST controller like so, and we'll create an endpoint here, def reservations, and this will be, we'll map this to / reservations, and let's see, reservations.
So
I'm
this
gonna inject,
the REST controller annotation, and the get mapping annotation, that's all standard Spring stuff. And we're able to apply those to a Groovy class in exactly the same way that you could to a Java class, yeah?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. This is all just, you know, you'd recognize this from Spring. One thing you'll notice is that I'm not specifying the return value here. I'm not saying return. The last expression in the method is the return value. So
That's right.
At runtime, this will be effectively a collection of reservation. The return value for Java's perspective will be a collection of return value, of reservation rather. All right, so that's my very simple REST controller. We can see that in action. I would want a view, of course, just to, you know, cherry on top of the cake sort of thing. I want a nice HTML view. So let's create a reservation MVC controller. And here we'll create an endpoint called, and again, this is a demo, Jeff. It's a demo. I'm not going to do exactly this kind of thing in production. So I just like to set this off as being something that stands unto its own. It's not meant to be duplicated exactly. You would never ever do exactly this. This is something that wouldn't happen in a real world situation. This is not. This is a drill, rather. So
you can do crazy stuff here that no one would ever do, right?
Never, ever. Something like reservations.php, right? There you go. So that again, it completely.
No one would ever do that. No one would do that.
So here we go. We're gonna return now a new model and view, and you'll notice that where save for some exceptions like this, where I'm using def, for example, and where I'm using single quotes. I could use double quotes, and I could explicitly define the return values. It is very, very easy to get code that looks exactly like Java. And in fact, with respect to Java 1.7 or lower, I can copy and paste any code page from those versions and paste it into a Groovy file, and that should basically work, right?
That's correct. Pretty much all, there's a couple of really small, there are a couple of exceptions, but in general, your Java syntax, Java 7 and prior syntax is valid Groovy syntax. So you could take a .java file and rename it to be a .groovy file, and by and large, you'll have valid Groovy code.
Which is very convenient because it makes, you know, you can choose, you can pick off, you know, small pieces of productivity here and there, and take more as you can handle it, you know. So what am I doing here? I'm going to create a model and view. The model is the view rather is the first string there, and the second thing is a map. It's a model that contains the things that I want to send into the template to render, right? So I'm going to render this data in a view, in an HTML view, and I'm going to do so by injecting the reservation repository there, and I'm going to say reservation repository dot find all. Does that look right to you there, my friend?
Sorry, I was on mute. That looks correct, right? Returning a model view. The view name is reservations. The model includes reservation list. Yes, that all looks correct, sir. Well done.
Very good. So I'm going to check that I've got on the build class path here. I should have my Groovy template starter. All right, so we need to add that. So Spring Boot starter, Groovy templates. And if we check the build here, we have Spring Boot starter Groovy templates. That's already on the class path. And now we can create a view that uses the Groovy template. So we could have used any of a number of different view technologies, but I like Groovy templates because they're just so darn convenient. So we're going to create a view called reservations.tpl. And here we get a type-safe DSL that we can use to actually generate the markup for our document. So it's going to have an HTML element at the root. We're going to have a head element like so. We're gonna have a title element. I'm gonna call this beautiful Grails. I have a body element like so. And then here, what do we want to do? We want to say that we have a unordered list, and then we want to say reservation list dot each, and then we want what? LA.
Yeah, you want to pass a closure to the each method.
Thank you. And then we say li. We don't need that. We just want to say it.reservation name. Is that right?
Yep. Is the model variable called reservation list or reservations list?
Reservations list.
Okay, so we want to keep those consistent.
Right. Okay. There you go. Good. Thank you.
Yep.
So that looks sane, doesn't it?
That looks correct to me. So 100% of what you've written has been Groovy code, right? The controllers, the repository,
Build.
the class, and even the view file is being written in Groovy.
Right. This is a DSL. This actually has there's a compiler involved in this.
Yeah.
Behind the scenes. So, okay, is that right? Looks okay.
That looks right.
Let's try it. So we're going to run the application. And if everything goes to plan, we should have a dynamically rendered list, list items. So let's see. Localhost reservations.php. Hey, look at that. Not bad for first go.
It worked.
It worked. Huzzah.
Well done.
So, that wasn't so bad. It is, like I say, we can just copy and paste Java 7 or earlier code into Groovy, and you get working code. You can strip away some of the noise, the verbosity, and replace it with more productive Groovy language features. And I'd say that Groovy here makes our code much nicer. We can get even more succinct, though, can't we? We can actually go to the Spring Boot CLI here. The Spring Boot CLI is, you can install it, and it gives you the ability to do something like this. I can say emacs hi.groovy at rest controller class greetings rest controller, and all I want to do is I want to return a greeting when so asked. Right, so I'll say at get mapping hi. And we'll return a hello, a salutation. All right. Okay, so those are very simple Groovy language REST API using Spring MVC. And I can run that by saying spring run hi.groovy. And what's going to happen is that's going to sort of hydrate the rest of the types that are required to run this. It's going to actually analyze the types in the AST there, and it's going to download all the dependencies that would allow that code to run. It's going to download the starters, the Spring Boot starter dependencies that would allow that code to proceed. So we've got that now here, localhost 8080 hi. All right, see, that works as well. So again, that's pretty succinct, right?
That is awesome.
Doesn't get much better than that. I can create a REST API, and that has a very, very unique characteristics, which is that, sorry, if I cat this, I can tweet it. I should mention that I could tweet it before I had the 280 characters, right? But I now have, I have 280, but I could have tweeted that before I had that as well. I could do it with 120.
True.
So that's a big deal. I know the enterprise, they clamor for, tweetable REST APIs, so that's cool. But that's a bit of a toy, isn't it? I mean, it'd be nice if I had that kind of productivity and that kind of convenience without having to sacrifice sort of the norms of building a development project, right? What's a good way to get that?
So we've been working on a framework for about a decade now that contributes a whole lot to that.
Ah, right. So let's see. Start.grails.org.
Yep.
Let me.
Start.grails.org is similar to start.spring.io in that it's a web app for creating and initializing and creating a new Grails application or Grails plugin for that matter.
So what do we got here? Look at that. So we go to start.grails.org. We can choose a project type, an application or plugin, give it a name. I'm going to call this the reservation, app. Give it specify a version. I think I'll leave it as is with the default, and specify a profile. And here there's a number of different profiles. I see support for building a web app, which sounds about what we're trying to do. So I think
we'll build a web app, but just quickly, that list of profiles there is, so Grails 3 supports application profiles. You can build an Angular app, you can build a React app, you can build a REST API app, a web app. So we've got a lot of flexibility in Grails 3 that did not exist in Grails 2 around a lot of that.
That's very convenient. All right, so the kind of web app today that we're going to build is a REST API, right? So I guess we're going to need at least what we've got. And it'd be nice to be able to customize my JSON output, right? So what do you recommend for that?
Yeah, select JSON views there on the right. And once we get enough of the application in place that we've got a REST API in place, we'll take a look at that in more detail and see what that's all about. But that's super duper cool technology, the JSON views.
All right. Should I leave it as is? Should I go ahead and hit generate or use curl or?
That looks good. Click generate and that'll download a zip file for you.
Okay. So this is the app now.
And again, all you've done there is unzip it, and now you're opening the project in IntelliJ, right?
Right. As quick as I can. All right. Go, go, go. So as before, I'm going to start with the data. I'm going to build some sort of entity. I could do this by hand, certainly, but there's a very convenient tool that we can use here with Grails. It's still resolving the dependencies. It's still sort of, making note of the structure of the directory here. Okay, good. So there we go. I could certainly create a domain object myself, but Jeff was showing me the Grails.
The Grails shell, yeah. So if you run the Grails W, which is a Grails wrapper script, what that'll do is start up an interactive shell where we can execute Grails commands interactively. If you weren't using the Grails wrapper and had Grails installed on your path, you could do exactly what we're about to do now with just typing Grails, enter. We're using the Grails wrapper, which I think is a really good idea. So in this shell now, you can enter any command that you might have typed on the command line, like Grails space create domain class, but you just eliminate the Grails at the prefix because we're already in the context of this shell.
And it's really fast because you don't have to restart the JVM, right?
It's really fast. That's right. So when you press enter right now, it'll be done before you lift your finger off the key, right? So it's done. And just to be clear, so it was typed on the command there for several seconds, and you hadn't pressed enter. As soon as you pressed enter, it completed there, which is good.
Right, instantly. And that gave me a new class called reservation.groovy. So let's open that up and see what it looks like. And I think I know what to do here, Jeff. You can leave this to me. I think I know what to do. So I'm going to go here and I'll annotate it with @entity, as I did before. We'll create an ID. We'll create a field called reservation name, like so. And we're going to annotate this with @ID and @generated value. All right, got it. What about that, huh?
Yeah, that's close. And so you could have copied and pasted that directly from the one we wrote in the Spring Boot app, and that would work. But so in Grails, we've got this really powerful ORM tool called GORM, and it does a whole lot of stuff for you. So for example, you don't have to mark the class with @entity. This class is already an entity automatically because of where it's defined, and it's defined under that domain directory. You don't need to annotate the ID field with @ID or generated value. It will be the ID field by default, and it will default to be generated. And in fact, you don't even have to declare the ID field. We add the ID field to all of your domain classes by default. So what process you can just delete that line. There you go. The process you just went through is that's a big part of migrating from Java to Groovy, is often just deleting a bunch of code from your source files, which is what you just did.
Good problem to have.
It's good.
So what is this constraint business?
Constraints is a property you can declare in a domain class that allows you to declaratively describe some rules for what are valid values for properties in this class. So for example, if you had an age property, you could say the age has to be greater than 0. So we could constrain the reservation name to say something like it has to begin with an uppercase letter, right? So you would do that, and you can use the matches constraint and then put a regular expression here, just like that. Yeah, so that will prevent the system from ever allowing a reservation to be saved if the reservation name does not begin with an uppercase letter. And of course, you can there's lots of flexibility and different rules you can impose here, but I think the one you've typed there is a perfectly good example that we'll demonstrate once we can get into a UI where we can start to create some of these things.
Okay, so
looks good.
How do I save some data?
How do you save some data? We could, so why don't we build a simple CRUD interface that will allow us to persist data or create data through the browser. So generate some scaffolding for the reservation class. So in the console down there, if you type generate-all, and you'll get auto completion there. That's super cool. Yep. So what that command is going to do is, again, notice how quickly that happened. As soon as you pressed enter, it was done. So it created a controller, it created a service, and it created some view files. And we'll look at all of them before we're done here. But maybe we're mostly ready to start the application up and see what it looks like. But maybe, so we've got some data to look at. Why don't you open up the Bootstrap class? And the Bootstrap class is a place, this init closure here gets executed at application startup. So one thing to do here is to, you can create some data. And maybe before we do this, maybe we should look at that service because we're going to use the service here in Bootstrap. So let's look at the service that was generated when you ran generate-all.
Okay, let me check that out. So,
a slight detour there, sorry about that.
And then go to the service itself. Reservation service.groovy. All right.
So this was generated when you ran generate-all, and it's an interface that is annotated with that service for reservation. And this is a really, really cool mechanism for declaring kind of your data access layer in a Grails application. We've just introduced this GORM data services support not too many months ago, 2 or 3 months ago. It's a new feature in GORM 6.1, and you can just write an interface that declares all your query methods. And we don't have time to get into a whole lot of it right now, but there's all kinds of cool flexibility you've got in the way you declare these methods. But for now, we'll just say that this is the interface to our database, and we don't have to write an implementation for this interface. We just write the interface, and GORM's going to do a whole bunch of cool stuff for us. So notice one of the methods here is a save method. So in the Bootstrap class, we'll write some code that calls that save method to persist reservations to the database.
Okay. So that'll do it for us, right? That'll do it at startup.
Yeah, why don't we inject one of these reservation service objects into the Bootstrap class.
Okay, reservation service.
And Spring developers might be familiar with marking that property with that auto-wired, and you can do that, but that's superfluous here. So auto-wiring will be imposed. It's imposed on all of your Grails artifacts automatically. So we don't have to mark it with auto-wired. That property will, in fact, be auto-wired for us.
Wow. Okay, so for posterity and consistency, how about we use the same names as earlier? So
I think that's a fine plan.
Astro, Judy.
Astro's the dog, by the way, yeah.
I knew that. I was just testing you.
Uh-huh.
Astro, Judy, Jane, Elroy, Rosie. Who else?
George.
George, of course.
Judson.
All right, so we got the names.
Yep.
And now on the map,
over all those and persist them to the database, or create reservations with those names.
Right.
And persist those to the database.
Reservation service dot save new reservation. Reservation name equals 8. Right. All right. So there we go. We've got data. We're the same as before, and this is going to be run very much like our application runner. It'll be run when the application starts up, and so we're going to confirm that everything is working as we expect it to by calling reservation service.list and visiting all the return values. So here we are. That look right to you, my friend?
Looks perfect. The parens are optional there, but they're fine.
Which are?
The parentheses on line 14 are optional, but they don't cause a problem to be there.
Oh, that's true, right? So we can say line. There we are. Not bad. So, okay.
Yep.
Can we give it a whirl and get it going?
Fire it up. Let's see what happens. So to recap, what we've done so far is you wrote the reservation domain class, then you let the framework generate the scaffolding for us, and wrote the code we're looking at now. But really the only code we've written is the domain class and this code in Bootstrap. And strictly speaking, we don't need the code in Bootstrap. It's just a convenience that'll create some data for us.
It's something we do because we need it for the demo, not because it's real data.
Yeah, I just want some information to look at. And I saw, before the browser opened there, I saw some console output that indicated that the objects really were saved to the database.
Yep, there it is.
Yep, so that those 6 lines there, those are coming out of line 14. So that's evidence that the things really were persistent in the database.
Wow. And we got this amazing user interface in this whole experience. What do we have here?
So we're looking at the default UI that's in place when you very first create a Grails 3 application using the web profile. And so in a real application, of course, you would change this to look like whatever you need your app to look like. But what the default index page does is it lists all the controllers in the app. So down there at the bottom, the one controller is our reservation controller. If you click on that link, you'll see, there we go. We've got a list of, we can see all of the reservations that are in the database. Do create new reservations. There's a button up there at the top to do that. Let's do that. And notice if you try to create a reservation that violates our rule, so it begins, so you can't click create and the box is marked red to tell you something's wrong because the thing doesn't begin with an uppercase letter, which is the rule.
So that validation in the class is bubbling up to JavaScript?
Yep, that's exactly what's happening. It's not just in the JavaScript, it's in the actual data code in the application. So if you got around this JavaScript somehow and tried to save an instance with an invalid name, it wouldn't work.
Double defense.
Yep.
All right, let's try something more reasonable like Jeff.
Yeah, look at that. Create. So
That worked. Go to the list, there we are.
Yep. And you can view them and edit them and delete them. But so really all we've got a basic CRUD interface that we can interact with from the web browser right now.
That's convenient. Wow, that's amazing.
Super easy.
Far more, we're sort of far more finished and polished than my, however amazing, impressive movie templates demo, huh?
It's no.php, we'll say that.
All right, very good. So now how do I build a REST API? What's the next step here?
How do we build a REST API? Well, I guess one thing we can take a look at is send a request to the same URL you've got there, but put .json at the end.
Okay, .json. There we are.
So we get a JSON representation of all the data. But we get that for free, right? We haven't written any JSON stuff yet, but we will. And we could, it's not, we'll save a little bit of time. It's not worth going through demonstrating this, but if we really wanted to, we could use like curl or something. We could generate some posts to the application and create instances without really building a proper REST API. There's support for that in the app now, but maybe a better idea than demonstrating that is to build a proper REST API and see what that looks like.
All right.
How do you feel about that? What does that mean? So let's go back here. Go ahead and stop the application and let's take a look at your reservation class. And here, if you annotate this class with @resource, yeah, there you go, and specify a URI. So say URI equals /reservations. And it doesn't have to be reservations, by the way. It's just a string. It could be anything at all, but reservations make sense.
Yeah. All right.
Perfect. So a number of interesting things are going to happen as a result of that line of code there. One is we're going to get a controller will be generated for us. So one thing we can do right now is let's go delete the controller that was created earlier when we ran generate all. We didn't really even take a look at it, but it's out there and it has a bunch of code in it. We can just delete that controller as if we never generated it, we never wrote it. We don't need it anymore. Awesome. And the reason we don't need it right now is a controller will be generated for us because we marked that domain class with that resource. And there are reasons you might want to have a controller in addition to having the add resource. So you're not, if you wanted to add your own custom logic to the controller, you can. But for our purposes, we're going to stick to the default CRUD stuff. And since we're going to stick to the default CRUD stuff, we don't need the controller. We need a controller, but we don't need source code for it. The controller will be created automatically because of the at resource annotation on resolution.
Okay.
So
So
I think we're probably in a runnable state right now.
Okay. Let me hit go. Make it so.
Why don't we hit go and make it so? How's that?
Are you a Trekkie fan?
A little bit.
Me too. All right. Running the application.
We've actually got less code now than we had before, and we've got more behavior, more flexibility.
I didn't feel like I was missing out before. I felt like I was in a good position. So this is all the better. All right. There's the application. Up and running. Go to the reservations REST controller. Go to that. .html.
Yeah, so we've given up HTML support momentarily here. We can get it back pretty easily, but right now what we've got is a REST API, right? So we can send a GET request to /reservations and you get back a list. Maybe, have you got a command prompt that we can get out of the browser just for a minute to demonstrate a couple of things?
Right. Okay.
So just send a curl GET request to that URL.
Yep. All right. Look at that. That seems to have worked.
Right.
We got the records. We got the records back. I bet I could deep link to one of them, right? So let's see. JSON 5. Oh, 1 second.
I don't know what the JSON PP there at the end is. Oh, you don't want the .json /5. You want /5.json.
Okay. Let me see. Oops. 5.json.
And
there we are.
You need to get rid of the .json before the slash.
Ah.
There you go.
Look at that.
Yep, and you don't even need the .json. That's the default. You can get rid of the .json altogether.
Very good. Okay, so we got the REST API. We just got that for free just by having that resource annotation.
Yeah, why don't you send a post request to create a record?
Content -type application -JSON -d curly bracket single quotes, because of course it's single quotes. And then the reservation name will be called foo, and X will be post HTTP localhost 8080/reservations. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, and what we're doing, go ahead and give that a spin. What we're doing there is posting some JSON to that URL, and now a new record just showed up there. The one at the bottom there, foo.
Instantly.
We could keep going. We could generate some puts to do updates and deletes to delete, but we really do have a fully functioning CRUD REST API now, but we've given up the browser front end, right? But we can easily get it back, but we don't have an HTML front end anymore right now.
I like that front end, man.
What's that?
I like that front end. How do we get it back?
Oh, we can get it back. We're about 12 characters away from having all of your dreams fulfilled here. So when you annotate this class with that resource, that creates a controller for us and some other stuff that supports this REST API. There's an optional attribute on the resource annotation called formats. Formats equals, and give it a list of, not a string, but a list of strings. And yeah, so put HTML and then comma JSON, maybe comma XML. And what that is a list of formats that we want this controller to support. So if you control click on the formats word there, so we can see what the default value for that thing is.
Right.
The default value is JSON and XML. So notice two things. Notice HTML is not in the list, and notice that JSON is first in the list. So that curl command we just executed a minute ago, where you didn't specify what format you wanted.
Right.
The first element in this list is the default format.
Wow.
We go back to reservation.
JSON by default.
Yep, that's right. So the change that we just made in reservation.groovy does two things. One, it adds HTML to the list, and it makes HTML the default. So let's see, is the application still running?
Yeah, looks like it.
Yep, so if you go re-hit the curl command, you'll see the same behavior you saw before. Yeah, so, well, yeah, so we didn't, so what we're seeing is we get an HTML response there. because HTML is the default. So now if
Right.
you put .json at the end of the URL,
JSON here.
instead of creating new data, go back to where we were sending the GET request.
Okay.
There we
All
go.
right. Yeah.
Yep. And I think we're going to have 2 or 3. Let's see. We do have a foo there. All right. So that's working. If you don't put the .json there, you're going to get HTML back, which is not really what you want, but it is
Right.
what you want in the browser. You can put .xml there while we're here. See what that does.
So XML. Okay.
Yep. Look at that. So we get an XML representation of all that data.
Right.
And maybe go back to the browser and see what it looks like now. We should have our HTML front end back in place.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Back to the browser, and we'll hit the HTML endpoint. So HTML. There we are. Oh, wow.
And you don't need the .html because HTML is the default now. So there you go.
So that all works, and I can now, as you say, I can go to JSON as well.
Yep. So we've got a full CRUD API in place that we can interact with from the browser. We can interact with it from curl or from any REST client, right? So you could write a piece of software that had a REST client in it that was making calls to this application to retrieve data or update data or create new data. We've got a full CRUD API in our application now that's accessible via REST and from the browser.
Wow.
Super cool stuff.
Right on. So what if I wanted to change? I like that. I like the user interface you gave me, and I like the REST API. But one thing I often get is, different clients have different perspectives that they want to have of the data. How do I manipulate the view of the JSON that I get back and send back to the client?
The structure of the JSON. So we're not talking about the HTML. We're talking about the structure of JSON, right?
Yeah. I mean, the HTML is far better than I could have gotten on my own, but a very common requirement is to change or dynamically.
So look out, do this, go out under the views, Grails app /views/reservation.
Yeah.
And look at index.gsp. And so just add, so right anywhere in here, reasonable. So go up near so just inside the body tag, put an H1 that just says, hello from Antwerp, or just put some kind of message here. And then go back to your browser and refresh the index page.
Oh, wow.
And I don't see it, but oh, yeah, there it is. Hi from Antwerp, right? So we can customize this view, right? We can make this look like whatever we like. We can also customize the JSON that's being rendered. And let's go take a look at that. So go back to the IDE.
Yep.
And these views that we're looking at under Grails app /views/reservation, there's 4 or 5 GSPs there. There are 4 GSPs.
Right. Create, edit, index, and show.
Yep. So the GSPs define the HTML front end for this app. And we're going to add, so create a file in that directory called index.json, G-S-O-N. Right next to index.gsp, but call it index.json.
Okay. Wait, so right next to index. Okay, so here we go.
Yep.
Index.gsp.
GSON, yep.
GSON. All right, and this is going to have a model, right?
Yep, it's going to have a model, and let's kind of fill it out, and then we'll make another pass and describe what's going on here. But do you want an iterable of reservations here?
Reservation, all right.
Call it reservation list.
Reservation list. And is that a fixed name? Does it have to be reservation list?
Strictly speaking, no, but we'd have to change. There's some other things we'd have to do if we wanted to call it something other than reservation list. So if we follow the convention, we've got less work to do.
I like conventions.
Yep.
All right. Consistent. We get velocity through consistency.
So we want JSON space MPL dot reservation.
Right.
And pass the list as the reservation list as an argument. And again, we'll come back to this and describe what's going on, but let's just make it work for now.
Sure.
In the same directory, create underscore reservation.json.
Okay. Underscore reservation dot JSON.
There you go. That looks good.
Okay.
Perfect. And again, you've got a model, but instead of an iterable, you've got one reservation here. Yep.
Good.
And then a JSON block, so JSON space closure, And let's start here. Just type the word namespace reservation.name.
Like so?
That looks good. So go
Okay.
ahead and let's leave it just like that. Go ahead and restart the application.
I can do that.
And we're going to see some really cool. So what we're working with here is a technology called JSON views. And note that when we created the application back at start.grails.org, I asked you to turn on the JSON views checkbox.
Right.
If we're building a web application, the JSON views are not there by default. We had to turn that on. If we were using the REST API profile, they'd be there by the JSON views is there by default. But so go to either in the browser or in curl, either way, but get a JSON representation of the reservations.
Like so? Oh, wow.
That looks good. All right. So you see name Astro, name Judy, name Jane. Go back and edit that JSON file we were just looking at.
Right.
And change the word name to anything else. Make it reservation name. Perfect. And refresh this.
Wow.
So you see those changes?
Yep, that was instantaneous. So
it's instantaneous. So Grails users are used to having a reloading mechanism in the framework, so you can make a change to a controller and see those changes within a few seconds. The changes you make to JSON files are immediately reloaded. There's not even like a second wait. You can't get over to the browser and initiate a request fast enough to beat the reloading thing. Which is great. And another thing that's cool about them is look in the, go back to the IDE and edit that file some more.
Mm-hmm.
So this is executable Groovy code describing the structure and content of your JSON response. So because it's executable Groovy code, you can put if conditions, you can put loops, you can put all kinds of cool stuff here. So yeah, do something like, yeah, that looks good. Yeah, so interrogate that and see if it's, yeah, so that's, if it's an even number, then render the ID. So ID space.
Wait, and okay, we want reservation.
Just so ID space reservation.id.
Right.
Put the word ID in the front there.
Okay,
there we go.
Okay, so we're contributing that out to the JSON view, and that'll just reload. I don't have to reload that either.
That's right. You'll see that. There you go. So notice we're only seeing the IDs for every other one. Right. So the ID in particular, you wouldn't do that too. You always want the ID probably, but you might have some conditional logic that says if this, whatever, if the invoice has fewer than 10 line items, then render one thing. Otherwise, render something else. But the ability to have some conditional logic there in the JSON file is awesome. It just opens up a lot of flexibility. So you don't want to implement a lot of logic inside of your JSON files, but it's nice to be able to have some simple condition things like
right.
that.
Like some endpoints want to return, a master like sort of view, but sometimes if there's a flag or something, you could say, in the incoming request, maybe I want to return the details as well, the master detail.
That's right.
Data, and I could dynamically toggle that based on these conditions that I evaluate at,
you could. Absolutely. Super cool. So let's take one more look at those JSON files.
Yep.
To kind of back up to the beginning and describe what's going on. So let's look at the index one for a moment. Index.json. Yeah. So what this is doing is when this is rendered, a whole list of reservations is kind of being passed into it. And what line 7 is doing is rendering a template called reservation and passing this list of reservations into that template. And what the JSON views engine is going to do with that is it's going to render the template over and over and over again, once for every element in the reservation list. And then that underscore reservation.json is the template that's being rendered.
Right.
So someone just now asking in the chat, is the underscore prefix in the JSON file required? And it is required in order for it to be a template. So notice that index.json does not have an underscore, but underscore reservation.json does.
So this gets used in processing each value in the index, right?
That's right. And in our case, right now, we've only got one JSON file that's rendering that template, but we might have lots of places where we want to render that template over and over again. So we're defining the rules for how a reservation is represented in JSON in one place. And right now we're only taking advantage of it from one place, but we could have lots of views where we want to take advantage of that same template.
Right on.
JSON views is really, really cool stuff. You can learn a lot more about it at views.grails.org. But so that's, I think, a reasonable introduction to the type of JSON views. Really, really cool stuff.
I dig it. That gives me a lot of power. Now, this is definitely a much better way to, this is a very dynamic, very powerful, very sort of opinionated, very productive approach to building REST APIs. But I still want to lean on a lot of the things I've come to know and use in the Spring ecosystem. Like, what if I wanted to have a report that I generated every day? What's how could I stand it up? In the Spring ecosystem, I might use something like the at scheduled annotation, or in a more enterprisey setting, I'd use something like Quartz.
Yeah, Quartz is a good example. So Grails has a really rich plugin system where plugins can add all kinds of capabilities to the framework. So let's add a Quartz plugin to the project and just quickly demonstrate kind of what that can do. So if you go to plugins.grails.org,
okay,
and search for Quartz, and you're going to find a number of plugins that'll match that, but we want the one that's just called Quartz.
Alrighty, let's see what we get. There we go. This one.
Yep. Let's see. Yep, that's the one. So just copy that compile time dependency there.
Okay.
We're going to paste that into our build.gradle file. And what we're doing is we're adding the Quartz plugin to this Grails application.
Aha. Okay.
There we
That
go.
was easy.
And in order for that to be in effect, so we've added a whole new library to the project. We're going to have to restart the thing. So go back to your terminal where you've got Grails W running.
Right.
And kill that and fire that back up.
Terminal. Okay. Grails W, killing this here.
Yeah, exit that guy. There you go. Just start it right back up. And now when you start it up, that dependency will be recognized and Quartz will be available. And one of the things the plugin does is it adds a new command here. So before we type create domain class and generate all, there's a new one, should be a new one called create job. Yeah, there it is. So run create job and just give it any name, printer or something like that.
It's not giving me options for jobs here yet, so.
Well, yeah, there's nothing to autocomplete there. You'll have to type in, yeah.
Printer. That's our new job. So we're going to have
that just created a class called printer job.
Right. And that's a Groovy file.
That's a Groovy file. And what the plugin is doing is so Quartz is a whole sophisticated library with all kinds of capabilities for scheduling jobs. And what the plugin is doing is providing access to all the power that Quartz has to offer, but making it very, very easy to take advantage of that.
Wow.
We've got a lot of flexibility in that triggers block. We can configure the job based on a cron expression or whatever, but what you've got there by default will cause this job to run every 5 seconds. And
I see.
what you're doing now is every 5 seconds, we're just going to print out a message that indicates how many records are in the database. That's a reasonable demonstration, I think.
And I think this is really worth pointing out too, is that we have string interpolation here. So we're saying there are $ curly bracket. That is not the Spring value expression property placeholder resolution.
Right.
In fact, that's actually the Groovy language itself interpolating elements from surrounding context.
Right. And inside of those curly braces, you can put any valid Groovy code. You can put method call. Well, you do have a method call in there. You can put anything that's valid Groovy. You could put inside there. Yep.
Yeah. Wow, that's very, very cool. So we have to run the application again, or is that just loaded?
Yeah, go ahead and start the application up.
Okay.
And what should happen is every 5 seconds we should see that message. So what's represented here is a mechanism for doing something on a schedule, right? And we're simply printing a message. But what this could be doing is every night at midnight, you go look at all the pending records and send emails, do whatever it is that you need to do on some schedule. This trivial example is just showing kind of the mechanics of how we would set up a scheduled job. And to do that, we're taking advantage of Grails, the Grails plugin system. There are thousands of Grails plugins on the planet. Most of them have been written by just members of the community. And those plugins add capability and simplification to your Grails application. So we're going to take advantage of Quartz here without really learning anything about Quartz, and we're not going to write a bunch of Quartz config stuff. We're just the plugin's going to take care of most of it for us.
So we can focus on the job that we care about running.
Right. So let's look at your console and see if that job is running. So we should be seeing output every 5
Looks like
seconds.
it.
And we are. And maybe just quickly create another record just so we'll see that number change, and then we can. Yeah, that looks right, I think.
Right. That's running on the console there, so that looks fine. So, want to save another record?
Yeah. So save a record, just so we can see that 6 turn into a 7 there. And it looks like it worked. And the next time the job runs, we should see the number 7.
Or not?
Let's see. Go back to that curl command there. What just happened there? Curl.
Reservation save. Oh, okay. Wait. So that's the old one.
Oh yeah, that's the old one. So you just want to post to /reservations.
Right.
There you go. That work. And you're going to get HTML because you didn't put the .json in the back, but that's fine. So let's. You should have another record in the database now.
Okay. So I've got. I want to run another record still, right?
Yeah, you could. So if you put .json at the end there, you'll get JSON representation back instead of HTML. JSON, not JSON.
JSON, sorry. Hey, look at that. Another record, foo1. There we go.
Looks good, and I'll bet your quartz job is now outputting a number greater than 6. I don't know how many times you ran.
Many more.
Yep.
Markedly more. So 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
Well, that's good.
That was easy.
That's awesome. It was easy.
Sorry?
I said it was easy. I was agreeing with you, sir.
I like this stuff right here. This is actually very useful as well. This I can see information about what's installed in my application, which plugins are installed. There's Quartz down there. That's one of the extra things.
Yep.
It looks like much of Grails itself is installed in terms of plugins. And the artifacts that I've gotten here, the components, my application, the application status. This is something that we care about a lot in the Spring Boot world, is surfacing information about the application. We saw that. Did we even get a chance to touch on that? We didn't. I'm not sure that we got a chance to touch on the actuator.
Yeah, we did not, but so we could demonstrate that back in your boot app or demonstrate in the Grails app. And one thing that's interesting about that is it's exactly the same in both places.
Yep.
So Grails 3 is built on top of Spring Boot. So really anything you can do in Spring Boot, you can do in a Grails 3 app, because a Grails 3 app is a Spring Boot app. So yeah, so edit application YAML, and we'll enable, we're going to want to do a couple of things here, I guess. We're going to need to enable the endpoints and turn off the security of those endpoints.
Right. So management.security enabled equals false. Whoa, management security enabled false.
That looks right. And then down below, there's a place that we disable them by default. You're going to have to turn it back on.
Oh yeah. Oh, actually, okay. Endpoints enabled.
Yep.
Equals true. There we go. So that looks right. And so worth noting that this is exactly the same thing you would use in Spring Boot. You could use either a YAML file, as we have here, or a property file. But if you're using YAML, these properties, most of these properties apply to Spring Boot itself, not just to Grails.
Yep. Yeah,
All
so
right.
for those changes to take place, you're going to have to restart. So why don't you go ahead and start that process? But I agree. So what you just said is this is the same approach you would use if it were Spring Boot, but it is Spring Boot. So it's not that we're mimicking that behavior. It is Spring Boot. So we're taking advantage of the fact that Spring Boot provides these endpoints. And because your Grails 3 app is a Spring Boot app, you can use, we get to use those endpoints.
And indeed, even the build, the Gradle build, you can say, Gradle W boot run, for example, and get it.
That's right.
All right, so now this should work. We can make requests like this, for example, and then go to /metrics. There we are. That shows you things like your heap, your non-heap, your uptime, your classes loaded, etc.
Yeah, so if we, and we probably don't need to circle back around and do it, but if we went back to the first app you wrote, the boot app that's not a Grails app, we'd see the exact same endpoint there, right?
Actually, absolutely. Exactly the same results. You just have Spring Boot starter actuator in the build.gradle, as we do here, and you get exactly the same results, same configuration, same everything.
Super duper cool stuff. So for the Spring developers who are here just to maybe learn a little bit about what Grails is about, note that an important thing to recognize is that Grails 3 is built on top of Spring Boot. So all the stuff that you're used to doing with Spring Boot, the actuators, whatever you can do in Spring Boot, you can do in a Grails 3 app, because as I said, a Grails 3 app is a Spring Boot app. And then Grails adds a whole bunch of other capabilities, the GORM framework and JSON views and a whole bunch of stuff. But it's not an entirely new landscape for Spring developers at all. It should be a very familiar place, I think.
And very productive one.
How do you perceive it as someone who primarily does Spring development? When you sit in front of a Grails app, what does it feel like to you?
I feel like I'm in a environment that's optimized for getting this kind of application going quickly, and it's obvious that there are features here that are, you ever hear that there's, I'm not sure if it's an urban legend or what, I'm not sure, I've never verified this, but you ever hear that there are, some insane number of words for ice or water? Eskimos have a large number of, sorry?
Yeah, or snow is one that's commonly reported, yeah.
Right, yeah, I'm not sure, I don't know if that's an urban legend, but I feel like there's a lot of ways, in this case, since we chose the web profile, there's a lot of ways to build a web app and get it right. There's a lot of things where there's a lot of care here that's been taken, It's obvious that this is for somebody who has built web apps before, This is somebody who wants to get it and get it done right. And I'm sure the other profiles, similarly are just as fine-tuned. Really impressive.
Yeah. So you said it's for folks who want to get it done and want to get it done right. And another important aspect to add to that list is get it done more quickly and more simply than might otherwise be the case. So everything that we've just done, we could do, in theory, we could do it with assembly language if we wanted to, right? But that's easy. You wouldn't do that. The idea is simplicity. And I think Grails and Spring conspire to make an environment that accomplishes that very well.
Absolutely, and you can see with Grails, we're really taking good advantage of the Groovy language, which I think is the killer feature here, right? Where
Absolutely, yeah. Groovy is integral to all kinds of benefits that Grails has to offer. So we were able to use Groovy in the Spring Boot app at the beginning of this adventure today,
right.
But we're able to take advantage of some niceties. But in the context of Grails, we really get to leverage Groovy. There are a lot of examples in Grails where Groovy is integral to contributing to a lot of the developer productivity stuff that the framework has to offer.
Yeah, absolutely.
So maybe it might be a good time we can maybe address a couple of questions that have come in through the chat channel, and then let folks know how to get a hold of us if they have any follow-up stuff. One thing that folks are asking about right now is WAR files and jar files. So maybe stop the application right now and go to a command. I'm going to point something out that not a lot of Grails developers know about. I find that sometimes Grails developers don't know about.
Okay, happy to do that.
Yeah, open your terminal and get out of the Grails shell there and run GradleW assemble. And so what does assemble do in a standard boot app?
It creates a packet. It packages the application.
Yeah, you're going to have to chmod the GradleW.
Oh, so I am. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. So is assemble there by default in a boot app?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, so it builds the application. It builds a distributable thing, right? So, and the first time we do this, it's processing resources. There's a lot of stuff going on right now. Our Groovy pages are being compiled. But ultimately, what's going to be created is a WAR file, right? So look in build/libs right now. Yep, so you see that. So go back to where you were just a moment ago. And we're going to run the same command again, but this time, before you run it, in build.gradle there, get rid of the WAR plugin. So there'll be a line that says apply plugin WAR. It'll be above where you are now.
Yep.
Yeah, there we go. Get rid of that guy and run GradleW assemble again. And what Assemble does is, it's not the case that Assemble builds a WAR file. That's what happened just a moment ago. But more generally, what it does is it builds your application. So now look in the build libs directory again.
There it is. So
Yeah.
build libs reservation app 01.
So what Assemble does depends on whether or not the WAR plugin is there. If the WAR plugin is there, you get a WAR file. If not, then you get a jar file. And that jar file is an executable jar file. So you can maybe put it in a Docker image or do whatever, give it to your ops folks. It may not run in its current state because, well, yeah, it probably will actually, because of the production database is set up just to use H2. But
Right.
the application that's an executable jar. We can execute it and the application would start up and we're ready to rock and roll.
Right on. I think there's some issue with my terminal and read line support here on this machine, but yeah, that would have started the application.
Yep. Let's see. Maybe take a look for see if there's another question or two that have popped up here that we can address before we break up.
Right. I want to apologize for the occasional latency in my responses. The Wi-Fi here hasn't been great.
Yeah, you're in a hotel in Antwerp, right?
Yeah. Sorry for the delays in some cases.
No, I think we're in good shape. I don't know. Let's see. Are there looking for any specific questions that maybe we should address before we break up? But maybe there aren't any outstanding. I know that some of the OCI folks have been addressing questions as they come up. Looks like we might be in good shape. Maybe we should wrap it up. Josh Long is, so thank you very much for hanging out with me this afternoon to go through some of this stuff. It's been super duper fun.
Thank you.
How do folks get a hold of you if they have complaints or have requests for you?
I'm on the Twitters at StarbucksMan like this. It's at StarbucksMan. Happy to engage there, or Josh at joshlong.com. And you are?
Yep, I'm Jeff Scott Brown.
Like so.
And Brown J at objectcomputing.com.
All right.
Yeah, so if you've got any questions or comments at all about Groovy, Grails, and Gradle, anything at all that we can do to help you out, please reach out and let me know. And anything at all about Spring Boot and that whole super rich ecosystem, I'm sure Josh would love to hear from you. I see someone just said, come out and see Red Rock show with me again. Was that Ed Young? I think that might be Ed Young who said that. I will do just that as soon as we get through the winter again, Ed. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks a whole lot to everyone who took time to join us this afternoon, and let us know whatever we can do to help you out. But I really hope that you found this to be an interesting exercise, and maybe
I did.
Things about Grails, Groovy, or Spring. I did as well, Josh. I think we'll call it good, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, and I will see you soon.
Yep. Cheers.
All right.
Bye-bye.